Okay, our next speaker is Royce, and his topic is, or title is The Spirit in the Net, Jung and Gebser and C.G. Jung, and the Effects of Technology upon the Psyche. Royce.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You've read that I'm a Jungian analyst, so I'm going to begin with a little bit of Gnosticism. Out of primordial oneness came the two, Pleroma Creation, spirit and matter. A Neoplatonist, Synesius, wrote about the lament of his soul. I descended to the earth, into matter, away from you, meaning heaven and the Pleroma, to serve the earth as a day laborer. But instead of a day laborer, I became a slave. Matter fettered me with magical arts. Jung's Red Book is also about the lament of his soul.
My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak. I call you. Are you there? I have returned. I am here again.
I'm here again. He says to his soul, who he felt abandoned him. Well, no, rather, he abandoned his soul. And perhaps that's the question of our time. Have we abandoned the soul of the anima mundi? Along with Gebser and Jung, my work has relied on the work of Marshall McLuhan, the so-called grandfather of media studies, which was my background before I became a Jungian analyst. And McLuhan wrote, when you put a man-made environment around the planet becomes an art form. Nature ceases to exist. Nature goes inside of a man-made environment. I'm calling that man-made environment the media life world. In 1944, before McLuhan was a media theorist, he wrote to colleagues in the church, increasingly I feel that Catholics must master C.G. Jung. The little self-conscious or unearned area in which we live today has nothing to do with the problems of our faith. Modern anthropology and psychology are more important to the church than St. Thomas today. Today, it appears that the computer has invaded our nervous system. Now, what does that mean? An Italian philosopher nicknamed Bifo writes, the introduction of pervasive technologies, the computerization of productive processes and of social communication enacts a molecular domination upon the collective nervous network. And I'm going to introduce a concept that was brought out by a Canadian, and I'll talk a little bit about him later, the idea of schizophonia. Schizophonia happens with recording. Now, recording didn't begin with sound, it began with writing, or cave paintings even, when an event in time becomes an event in space. An event in time, that is, let's say, the sound of a poem being read by its author or of a musical performance, becomes an event in space through storage. A container contains what was a moment. I'd like to play an audio tape that I helped discover in the Christina Mann Library in New York.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Whoa, okay.
Some greetings for you. I can't conceal the fact that I dislike the performance thoroughly, but I'm told that you like my voice better than I do. Since I'm expected to behave like an unselfish person, I will make the effort to speak to your imaginary presence. I have been born and I lived in a time where there existed nothing like artificial and disembodied voices, except the lunatic asylums. Now I shall submit to the demand to become one of those disconnected and abstract vocal existences, which are certainly a most alarming symptom of our crazy present. We are all a bit disconnected from the past, uprooted from our soil, and floating upon uncertain airs. That is the reason why I dislike to become one of those depersonalized voices, separated from my living personal existence. It is just the contrary of what my daily endeavor was in the last 50 years, namely to help people to get back to their roots, to the totality of their being.
The ability to record and replay sound and still and moving images has had a profound impact on the psyche, without a doubt. So schizophonia was a phrase, a word coined by R. Murray Schafer in a book called The Tuning of the World. He's a Canadian. And it's simply splitting sounds from their original context. All right, that's the definition of schizophonia. Now, of course, phonia, sound, has a heck of a lot to do with the ear. And the ear, according to our Jung and Gebser, brings das Ohr in German, and one hears, the word is hören, and to belong is gehören. So this sense of being together in a sphere is represented as, for those of us who've read a bit of Gebser, that's very much an ear-oriented mode of being. And we know that in the magical structure there are 5 primary characteristics: egolessness, spaceless and timelessness, point-like unitariness, interweaving with nature, and a magical reaction to the world. Marshall, back to McLuhan, he says the same thing. And as well-read as he was, I don't think McLuhan encountered Gebser, although I've never seen any reference by McLuhan to Gebser. He wrote in The Medium is the Massage, which is, of course, a play on McLuhan's phrase, the medium is the message. He writes, the instantaneous world of electronic informational media involves all of us, all at once. No detachment is possible. McLuhan's going to speak for himself now.
Until writing was invented, man lived in acoustic space, directionless, horizonless, in the dark of the mind, in the world of emotion, by primordial intuition, by terror. Speech is a social chart of this moment. Ours is a brand new world of all at onces. Time has ceased, space has vanished. We now live in a global village. The simultaneous happening. We're back in acoustic space. We have begun again to structure the primordial feeling, the tribal emotions, from which a few centuries of literacy have divorced us.
So you see, that's quite Gebserian, at least in my view. In media life, everyone and everything is set up to be a mechanized consumer, and the world appears to the individual as a standing reserve. And Jeremy spoke about this last night, what Heidegger called the Bestand. And he writes, everything is ordered to stand by, to be immediately at hand, indeed to stand there just so that it may be on call for a further ordering, on call for duty. One of Jung's observations is that a chief cause of neurosis is a conflict of conscience. In another place he wrote, a conflict of duty. We're often caught between the sense of obligation to the outer world's potential call to action. Who left their cell phone home today? Feeling a little anxiety because you might get a call. And the inescapable call of duty to oneself. or to one's soul. Coming from the work of Erich Neumann, who wrote a fabulous book called The Great Mother, in which he writes, the negative pole of the elemental aspect of the archetypal feminine has been ignored. There's today such an emphasis put on the rise of the goddess, the return of the feminine. The feminine is considered to be a container. What happens when that container becomes a prison? And that's what Neumann means about the negative pole of the elementary aspect of the feminine. The Gaia politic that values the positive mother archetype distracted us from her restrictive nature. The elementary aspect of the Great Mother is the great container, which tends to hold fast to everything that springs from it and surrounds it like an eternal substance. The great container holds fast, and there's a picture of another picture of a great container that surrounds us and holds us. A net suspends the great container's children, that would be us, in ever-ready standby. The matrix, mater, materia, and of course the film, The Matrix, that many of us know, offers complete connectivity and containment in a boundaryless and limitless world. She uses a net to keep her children on standby. A friend and colleague of mine, Joan Grossman, came up with a diagnosis to go into the DSM-6, which hasn't yet been published, and she calls it Generalized Media Disorder, a play on generalized anxiety disorder. And she writes in her book called Blackout, the pervasive invasion of communication technologies might be characterized as a generalized media disorder, in which we fail to perceive the body's limits. And of course, Dr. Rosen talked a lot about the aperion. That's another word for boundaryless, right? Let alone the limits of memory and intelligibility, because whose memory is going to match up to a computer's? So what's happening? What's happening in this time of ours? Jung has a lot to say. A lot was revealed through his unconscious during a period of near, what he said, near insanity. In 1912, he split from Freud. He was having all kinds of issues about women, and he was losing it. And what he did, according to what's written in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he went into a meditative state, what he called a yoga posture. I don't know what that yoga posture is, but he did something to calm his mind, and his unconscious began to speak. And he began to speak back to it. And that became what he then called active imagination. And one of the things that Jung realized that the spirit of this time, and this is an image from the Red Book, I'll just go back for a second. All of these, if you're not familiar with the Red Book, it's full of writing in Gothic script, the original, and illustrations, drawings, and paintings that Jung did. And this is a fantastical painting of a place in Switzerland, because Switzerland is landlocked, there's no ocean. The joke was always, I want to volunteer to be in the Swiss Navy. This, according to Agnella Jaffe, the fuller image is called Symbol of the Sacred in a Ring of Flames, floating above the world of war and technology. And the Red Book anticipated the First World War, or rather visions that Jung had in 1913, anticipated the First World War that began in August of 1914. And he was writing then this Red Book between the period of 1913 and 1916, so the First World War was happening all around him. Now, what for Jung represents the spirit of this time most? Progress, about which Nietzsche has a lot to write too. And what is one of the aspects of progress that we know today? Crazy busy. Dr. Rosen spoke about the vortex, and I'm glad I'm going early today because I think we'll find a lot of the themes are going to be repeated because we're all centered around the same thing, really. How are we going to get out of here? Now, there's another English language translated book of Gebser's, actually, Gebser's thought, in this little paperback called Anxiety, in which he writes, flight into senseless activity or into the unconsciousness of illness, flight back into the pictures of the past, nostalgia, or into egocentricity and isolation. Certainly the anomie that so many of us are feeling today, the directionlessness. Ask young people, what are they going to do with their lives? And they often answer, I don't know. I don't know. But I'll bet they're very busy. Yeah. A writer, Tim Kreider, says it's almost always people whose lamented busyness is purely self-imposed. They're busy because of their own ambition or drive or anxiety, because they're addicted to busyness and dread what they might have to face in the absence of busyness. Michael Harris wrote a book called The End of Absence, which basically is about the collective anxiety of media life world creating the end of absence. I'm a New Yorker, and I went into my subway station last week and I saw construction of these, some kind of boxes are going to come in, some big, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was going to tell us when the next train is coming. No, when I got into town, the boxes were already standing in another station, and they're ads in the subway. There is no escape. Jonathan Lethem, a writer also who wrote a great book about the Talking Heads album, Fear of Music. In it he wrote, we have nothing to fear except nothing itself, or that which masks itself as nothing, the ubiquitous, invisible, swirling everywhere. The terrible phrase, I have no time, says Gebser, is spoken far too often. Without realizing it, those who say it may mean, I have no life. I have no time means I have no life, for Gebser. Time, he says, has become a lifeless machine which threatens them. The fear of mechanized time and its noise controls them. They've lost the power to control it. So where does your time go? Because where your time goes shows you where your libido is. And keep in mind, libido for Jung is not the same as it was for Freud. For Jung, libido is about creativity and attention basically to anything. Anything to which we give our attention has made a deal with our libido. What you're paying attention to, in a way, is either what you want to do, or if you're addicted, what you're compelled to do. Yeah. Media theorist Zelinsky, we should not pay so much attention to how much or how little time we have. Rather, We should take heed of who or what has the power of disposal over our time and the time of others, and in what way. So again, to what are we giving ourselves? To what are we praying? To which altar are we saying yes to? But it's not really about abstinence. It's about trying to be conscious every day and of feeding oneself a healthy media diet. Healthy media diet. And that's going to be, I think, I'm not talking about climate change as part of this. I'm talking about I'm not talking about outer climate change, I'm talking about the inner climate. When the Red Book was published, it was on this, for the first time it came into the public was at the Rubin Museum in New York. And the title of the exhibit just flew out of my mind, but it was something about Jung's cosmology. Cosmology, Sean, right? But of course, what it was the inner cosmology. What is happening within us, our inner planets? What are we doing with ourselves? Pharmacon, it's a Jungian buzzword, and it's very much the principle of homeopathy, where the poison is the cure. It seems to be that the general consensus, the cure is going to be an inner reset. We have to reset ourselves. And the musician Brian Eno teamed up with a friend or whatever, Carl Hyde, and they have a song, Slow Down, Sit Down and Breathe.
Slow down, sit down and breathe. Everything talks. Slow down, sit down and breathe. You have to switch off, but you can't. You have to turn it on.
Right? You have to switch off, but you can't. How many experience that, right? Christopher Whitmont, I think, is the man who brought Jung and Gebser to New York and the New York Jungian community. And he was once asked, should everyone go into therapy? He said, no, not all problems need or can be solved already. Ooh. We can also sit down. When you cannot solve your problem, the question is really, can you sit down? Jeremy mentioned Peter Kingsley yesterday, and I can't go long enough with the opinion that Kingsley is a force to reckon with. He's written a book called Catafalque, which is a funeral beer. And the subtitle of the book is C.G. Jung and the End of Humanity. And notice it's the end of humanity, not the end of the world. The world's going to go by the way the world goes, but what about us? Kingsley said the real task for us now, at this particular point in Western civilization, is to stop and pause. Slow down, sit down, and breathe. As I like to recommend to people who want to meditate, sit down, shut up, and don't move. Whitmont asks, can you sit down? Now that everyone has to answer for himself. And if he has found that he could sit down, does he then find that he sits on grass or on tacks? Now Whitmont was Jewish. If he knew Yiddish, he knew the word spilkes. Spilkes im Toches. That means kind of like having tacks in your butt. Yeah, you can't sit down. Jung in a letter wrote, originally, and this is one of the many connects with Gebser, originally we were all born out of a world of wholeness, and during the first years of our lives are still enclosed completely inside it. There we have all knowledge without knowing it. Later we lose it and call it progress when we remember again. That's like the gurus tell us we know everything. Heidegger too. We have to reveal. That means we were there already. Yeah. To Miguel Serrano, Jung wrote, "It seems to me that nothing essential has ever been lost because its matrix is ever present with us, and from this it can and will be reproduced if needed." And here's the cover of Catafalque by Kingsley, in which he writes, "The essential nature of this primordial revelation which exists, as Jung says, since eternity, and can only be glimpsed at through the eyes of eternity, is its timelessness. It's behind and ahead of us, was there before either we or our culture were born, and will still be there long after we are gone." And the French cultural critic, philosopher Paul Virilio wrote, "One day the day will come when the day will not come." The only thing that really matters now, says Jung, is whether man can climb up to a higher moral level or a higher plane of consciousness. And we know Gebser would argue with that phraseology. In order to be equal to the superhuman powers which the fallen angels have played into his hands. But he can make no progress with himself unless he becomes very much better acquainted with his own nature. And that is our task, I think. We're not going to get anywhere unless we learn what we're made of. And we can thank both Jung and Gebser for giving us some clues. And I would very much like to thank the organizers of this conference and you for your attention. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Questions from the audience? Jeremy? Ever present, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear more of your thoughts on the connections between McLuhan and Gebser, specifically around acoustics, right? And McLuhan often uses this word simultaneity, that all of the communication mediums are all co-present, and this is the electronic culture. So just looking for you to riff a little bit more about that, the acoustics, Gebser, McLuhan, simultaneity.
Well, I mean, simultaneity in terms of audiovisual media is synesthesia, where the all-at-onceness. I'm not sure that I can really expand much more on it, because I feel it, just like this talk, I think we all know this, intuitively at least. We know this material. I lecture on this and I just wonder why, in a way. But it gets me to places like this, so I'm delighted. I just think that understanding that when we absent the eyes, a whole new world gets created. As a psychotherapist, I do phone sessions, but I very much dislike Skype sessions, video sessions, for two reasons. One, like Freud, I don't like to be looked at that way. I don't mind it live. He did. One of the stories is why he had people lie down on the couch, because he didn't want to be looked at so much. And he also thought people would be better able to free associate, which is exactly what you can do when you cover the eyes. Something else comes out because we belong, gehören. Right? This sense of being one with is much more easily apprehended. The problem is when magic takes on too much of the stage for us. I heard a very frightening thing the other day, and I mean this sincerely. I was talking with a younger person, a woman who runs an art gallery, and she was very excited to tell me about someone she met who's sort of advocating a return to magic. And I think as Gebserians, if you will, that should frighten us, because what that does is, what she's basically saying is, the line from Tomorrow Never Knows, the Beatles song, turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. Well, it's a lovely idea, but as every Zen master will say, what's wrong with thinking? It's just not the only way to go. So I hope that bridges a little bit.
Yeah. No, you were commenting on how do we integrate the return of the witness, right, the acoustics, which is so ever-present now.
Right.
And how do we distinguish or integrate that with the integral?
It dawns on me to say what we have to do is learn how to listen again, because it's so hard to sit down and focus. We're not really listening. And people have vast music collections. It's great, right? And I'm one of them. But it dawned on me not long ago, I haven't sat down to have an intimate connection with my fabulous loudspeakers, and they are fabulous. But they're on. I can blast the whole neighborhood. I was walking home many years ago. My roommate was listening to The Wall. I heard it 2 blocks away. And I said, wow, there's another Pink Floyd fan in the neighborhood. It's our house. So they're good speakers. But we're, and forgive me when I say we, yeah? I certainly don't want to say they are losing the ability to listen. But I think it's a common problem of our time. The Lincoln-Douglas debates went 7 hours, and there were 2 or 3 days. Our debates now last what, and for how long, and what's really being said. So slow down, sit down, and breathe. That's what one has to do in order to listen.
Royce, I have a question. I know it's quite apparent in your presentation, but in our conversations last night, your love for music and rock and roll. So how do you see music playing a role in mutation and bringing us into the integral consciousness, or putting us or keeping us on a path of individuation?
Well, first of all, it will require listening to the music, which is more than just feeling it, just dancing around, just having sort of particular musical temperatures in a way to accompany us during the day. You know, one of my playlists is called driving music. I have another one called vacuum machine music for cleaning the house. Right? So it would have to be along the lines of returning to, let's say, this notion of Wagner's the Gesamtkunstwerk, the engagement of an art form that was, well, opera is visual and sound, but an engagement. We have to bring ourselves to the music. You know, we think the music is coming towards us, but we have to give ourselves over to it. And of course, when music works its magic, no explanation is necessary.
I just loved your presentation, and I like, this whole idea about the generalized media disorder. And my question is, when you work with people and they come in, are they even aware? Like, I mean, they might be presenting as some kind of, disorder or discomfort in their lives or whatever, but do they have any idea that they might be suffering from a kind of generalized media disorder? I mean,
Generally not.
yeah, I mean,
no.
that would be
No.
my, yeah.
No, and one of a topic at a number of conferences is, what do we therapists do about the cell phone in the consultation room? It's an alien. It's an alien in the consultation room. And almost everyone has a great excuse for why they have to keep it on during session. Try talking to the mother of a young person about turning off their cell phone. It's very difficult. And I'm in a kind of a questionable place about whether to put my particular concern about media onto an hours-long discussion about the cell phone. I will pose the question, would it be all right to turn that off? But I'm almost loath to ask, why do you want to keep it on? Because I know the answer. There's the FOMO, fear of missing out. Now, that's usually fear of missing out on a cool thing to do, but fear of missing out on an emergency, because we're all on standby, right? And if you, as you know, there are very few electronic products today that have a complete off switch. The only way you can turn your television off is to pull out the plug. Your printer is always on, right? And now we have Siri and Echo and all of these devices that are always on, ready. They're ready for us, theoretically. Yeah, theoretically. So, yeah?
So I'm wondering a little bit about the question of there being a Wagner listening, and that being opposed to the vacuuming music listening. And I'm wondering isn't it a matter of not sequestering it, not placing it into the container of the listening moment, but to recognize that the vacuuming music is itself a listening, and that the acting and the sensation and the bringing into the body of the presence of the sensation in the action of vacuuming mirrored back to us in the music which we've curated for the action of feeling the sensation of performing the activity.
I don't think that's listening. You see,
is itself a kind of listening?
I would say yes on a bodily level, but it certainly is out of the mental rational level.
Amen.
It's not.
It's an integral level.
I would disagree. I don't think I'm integrated with the music when I'm vacuuming to it. I mean, that's just.
Can I try to give a super brief example?
Sure, please. I've got all the time in the world. This guy's gonna.
Time for me.
The way I just was. Okay, so a patient comes in to see me. I'm an acupuncturist. A patient comes in to see me. I work in a kind of a marginalized community setting. He was staying in a halfway house. One of his friends died that day in his sleep. He was charged with literally rolling the person over. As a result of that, there was this incredible disruption to his system. So when he came in, his complaint was that he couldn't have a bowel movement. So I do a basic acupuncture treatment to induce a bowel movement. And while I'm sitting there manipulating the needle, I suddenly hear Stairway to Heaven. And I'm assuming that this is in my own mind, because I often hear music or see things when I'm doing acupuncture. And so I start to manipulate the needle, as it were, in concert with, so to speak, the song.
Mhm.
Suddenly I realize that he's just got his headphone on his abdomen, and I'm listening to his headphones. And then I say to myself, oh, geez, Stickley, here you go again, thinking you're hearing this music, and it's this guy's headphone. And then I think to myself, no, this is the total moment. This is happening right now. I'm here. Let's go.
I mean, it could be a I would look at that as a synchronicity.
Absolutely. And yet, I have to bring my bodily sense into that. I have to bring my hearing sense into that. So that's what I'm talking about, is like a thin aesthetic. The aesthetic taken all simultaneously, the sensory all taken simultaneously, which includes the mental rational, includes the bodily, includes the aspect of the ear and its connection to the mental rational, and it also includes the, everything from the heels up. What if we could find the Wagner within the vacuums? And what stands in our way?
Then I don't think I'd be vacuuming then. I just don't think, I can barely do one thing at a time. And when I say do, I mean really focused do. Of course, I can vacuum. Before I became an analyst, I was an audio engineer at ABC Radio. And one of the signs of being really good is if you could run a show, have some audio channel having nothing to do with what we were doing on, TV on, and the newspaper in front of you. And could you not screw up? Because sometimes the only thing you had to listen for was, now this, and then comes the $5,000 finger, boom. You hit the commercial. It's safe to say that I kept my job for a long time, so I could do it, as my colleagues could do. But what really is that? On one level, I'm proud of being able to do that, and I'm also kind of sad that I was brought to that level, if you know what I mean. So I just don't think I can listen and vacuum at the same time.
I have to say that the ending to that little story is that when the song ended, the solo's pretty tight. When the song ended, he says, you got to get these needles out, man. I got to go to the bathroom. And I said, hey, it must be a spring clean for the May Queen.
Great. Thanks. That's good.
Oh, it must be a spring clean for the May Queen.
That's a lyric. That's a lyric out of the tune, yeah.
All right, we have just, we could take one more short question. Daniel.
Yeah, you made this interesting reference to Erich Neumann and the net as a kind of negative great mother.
Yes.
I hadn't thought about it in that way at all. I wondered if you could expand on that at all, that a kind of negative feminine as embodied in the net, the spider image,
Right.
almost like Shelob in Tolkien.
Right. That's exactly it. One of the component parts of the archetype is that it has two poles, always. And because of the limitations in language, we say things like positive and negative, or masculine and feminine. Everyone knows what a mother is. And some people have good mothers, and some people have really bad mothers. Like one of the mothers that was in Creedmoor Psychiatric Hospital, where I worked for a while, who slashed her baby 100 times with a razor. That is not a good mother, in an opinionated opinion. Yet she was a mother. So the point is that within an archetype, there are always these two poles. So there must be a negative side to the feminine. by definition of archetype. So what, and again, we're using value judgments because we're human. The negative mother, I'll make maybe a bad joke, the quintessential Jewish mother, and it's not limited to Jewish mothers, who don't let her children fly. She does this all the time. Come here, honey. Don't leave. If you know Pink Floyd's The Wall, the mother there. Baby. Yeah. So that's the image. Yeah.
Okay, we're at time. We have a break now. There's refreshment, coffee, and tea outside. And we gather again in 15 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Your presentation gave us purpose.